Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're back once again with another amazing science tutorial video. I'm Coach Spivey, joined with my son,
Jordan Spivey.
And if you haven't already, go ahead and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And also check us out at our website at
www.fathersoninterfaces.com
for more of our amazing science content and material. But without further ado, let's go ahead and check out our video for today, which is Anaerobic Respiration Fermentation 101. So let's do this. So let's first start off with what happens when we have and don't have oxygen. So if you notice, both processes take in glucose, which is the energy source, and then both processes go through glycolysis, where glucose is actually broken down into 2-pyruvate. Now when we have oxygen, we go through the process of aerobic cellular respiration, where acetyl-CoA is formed, and then we move into the Krebs cycle and then onto the electron transport chain. And what we get out of it as products is carbon dioxide, we get water, and then we get roughly 36 ATP. But what happens when we don't have oxygen? And like I stated before, both processes take in glucose as their energy source, and both processes go through glycolysis, which is glucose actually getting broken down into 2-pyruvate. But if you notice, in this process, it occurs without oxygen, so it doesn't go to aerobic cellular respiration. Instead, it goes into fermentation. And there are two types of fermentation. We have alcoholic fermentation, where ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, and 2-ATP are formed. And then we also have lactic acid fermentation, where we end up getting lactic acid and 2-ATP being formed. In this video, we'll be focusing on what happens in respiration when we don't have oxygen. Now let's take a look at alcoholic fermentation. And this is a type of anaerobic respiration that uses 2-ATP, 2-pyruvic acid, and 2-NADH to produce 2-ethyl alcohol or ethanol, 2-carbon dioxide, and 2-ATP. And the alcoholic fermentation is the process that causes bread dough to rise, and it is used to make alcoholic beverages. So let's take a basic look at what occurs in alcoholic fermentation. And first of all, it's important to know that this whole process occurs in the cytoplasm. So we're looking at the glucose that we get from our food that's taken in, and through the process of glycolysis, this glucose is broken down into 2-pyruvate acid molecules, and then this 2-pyruvate acid molecules along with 2-NADH are used to produce this 2-ethyl alcohol right here. So now let's take a look at the reactants that go into this process. So we have these 2-ATP, and I put an R for reactants. These 2-ATP going through the process of glycolysis. And then we have these 2-NADH that react also with these 2-pyruvate to produce 2-ethyl alcohol. So I put a P by products. So 2-ethyl alcohol are produced. We get 2 carbon dioxide that are produced. And then we have a total of 2 ATP that are produced from this alcoholic fermentation reaction. Moving on to lactic acid fermentation, and this is an anaerobic respiration that uses 2 ATP, pyruvic acid, and NADH to produce lactic acid and 2 ATP, and it occurs in animals and bacteria. And is used to make cheese, yogurt, sour cream, and buttermilk, and human muscle cells use this process to produce ATP during short periods when there is no oxygen. So for example, in intense exercise, if you notice, this man down here is taking a short breather or a short break between his sets in this exercise so he can get more energy back to his cells, and his muscles are going through lactic acid fermentation because they're probably low or short on oxygen. So let's go and take a look at this process. So lactic acid fermentation, just like alcoholic fermentation, starts off with the glucose that we take in from our food, and this glucose is broken down into 2-pyruvate to produce 2-lactic acid. So let's go and take a look at our reactants that go into this. So we have 2 ATP that go into this reaction. So let me put that up here. We got 2 ATP, and like I did in the last one, I'll go ahead and put an R for our reactants. And then we have our 2-pyruvic acids that go in, so that's another reactant. And then we have our NADH that goes in. If you notice, this 2-NAD plus is converted into 2-NADH, so we have our 3 reactants, 2 ATP, 2 NADH, and then 2-pyruvate, and they're used to produce lactic acid, which is our product, And then we also get a net of 2 ATP as well. And it's important to note that this 2 NADH is converted back to 2 NAD plus and is recycled once again to go right back into that process of lactic acid fermentation. So let's do a compare and contrast of the two types of anaerobic respiration. And in both types, glucose is taken in from the food that we eat, and both of them go through glycolysis, which is when glucose is broken down into 2 pyruvic or 2 pyruvic acid molecules. And then both of them occur without oxygen, so that means they both go through fermentation. So we have two types. We have the alcoholic fermentation that we discussed, and we have the lactic acid fermentation. And in alcoholic fermentation, we end up getting 3 products. We get the ethyl alcohol, we get the carbon dioxide, and we also get that 2 ATP that is produced. And then in lactic acid fermentation, we have 2 products. We have lactic acid, and then we have those 2 ATP that are produced. So let's take another look at these processes. So do they require oxygen? No. What are the raw materials? The raw materials is going to be glucose, or the C6H12O6, which is otherwise known as glucose. And the products are going to be lactic acid, and then 2 ATP for lactic acid fermentation. And then for alcoholic fermentation, it's going to be alcohol, carbon dioxide, and 2 ATP. The location inside the cell is going to be cytoplasm for both of these processes. And then both of these processes also produce 2 ATP as well. And another big difference between lactic acid and alcoholic fermentation is that lactic acid fermentation occurs in muscle cells, so like in humans and animals, and also occurs in bacteria. Alcoholic fermentation occurs in yeast. So the two biggest difference between these two processes is going to be the products that are produced and the types of cells that they occur in. We just completed a compare and contrast for the two types of anaerobic respiration, but now let's go ahead and compare and contrast aerobic versus anaerobic respiration. And then aerobic respiration is the process of producing cellular energy, or ATP, involving oxygen. And anaerobic respiration or fermentation is a process of producing cellular energy, or ATP, when there is a lack of oxygen. And like we discussed before, there are 2 types. We have lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation. So if we look at the 2 processes, aerobic versus anaerobic respiration, does it require oxygen? Well, aerobic respiration requires oxygen, while anaerobic respiration does not. And if you notice that both require glucose as an input, but if you notice, aerobic respiration requires glucose and oxygen, while anaerobic respiration only requires glucose. And if you notice in our products, carbon dioxide for aerobic respiration for both and alcoholic fermentation. So if you notice, for aerobic respiration, we have carbon dioxide, water, and also ATP as a product for aerobic respiration. But in anaerobic respiration, in animals, we have lactic acid, and then in yeast, we have ethanol and carbon dioxide that's produced as products. And the ATP that are produced, we have 36 ATP produced in aerobic respiration, while we only have 2 ATP produced in anaerobic respiration. But it is important to note that both make ATP. And also both occur in cytoplasm at one point, and they both use glycolysis. So if you notice that aerobic respiration starts out in the cytoplasm, but then it moves into the mitochondria. So it uses glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. And in anaerobic respiration, the whole process occurs in the cytoplasm. So it only just uses glucose. And then the types of cells that they occur in, aerobic respiration occurs in plant and animal cells, while anaerobic respiration occurs in muscle cells, bacteria, and yeast. Now you're going to use your notes and knowledge of respiration to fill in the following concept map. You're going to go ahead and take about 4 or 5 minutes to do so you can go ahead and pause the video now. Now it's time for our check for understanding. You're going to use your notes and knowledge of aerobic and aerobic respiration to answer the following. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'm Coach Spivey, son of my son Jordan Spivey. And if you haven't already, go ahead and like and subscribe to our channel. And also check us out at our website at www.fathersoninnovations.com for more content and material. And ladies and gentlemen, like I always say, make sure you have a wonderful, awesome, positive day. Peace.